The days following Daniel's sacrifice were somber. The facility operated in a muted haze, the usual energy and curiosity replaced by a heavy sense of loss. Rachel spent most of her time documenting everything that had happened: the discovery of the cryogenic pod, the awakening of Daniel Cross, the activation of the nanobots, and ultimately his decision to sacrifice himself. She wrote not just for herself, but for future generations. Hoping her account would serve as both a warning and a tribute, Eric assisted her when he could, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Daniel stepping into the EMP chamber, calm and resolute, knowing full well it would be his final act. He didn't deserve that, Eric muttered one evening, as they worked side by side in the lab. None of this was his fault. No, it wasn't, Rachel agreed, her voice soft. But he made a choice to protect us, to protect humanity, and we owe it to him to honor that. Eric nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. Do you think we'll ever understand why they did this? Why they created something so dangerous? Rachel sighed, leaning back in her chair. I don't know. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing, trying to create soldiers who could save the world. But good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. They continued their work. The team began dismantling parts of the facility. With the nanobots neutralized and the infected personnel recovering, there was little reason to stay. Supplies were running low, and the harsh Antarctic environment was taking its toll on everyone. Plans were made to evacuate within the week, leaving behind only automated systems to monitor the site remotely. Before they left, Rachel insisted on sealing off the area where Daniel's pod had been found. It felt wrong to leave it open, vulnerable to anyone who might stumble upon it. Using heavy-duty equipment, they encased the site in reinforced panels, marking it with a simple plaque, in memory of Daniel Cross, whose courage saved countless lives. Back home, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an event. Rachel and Eric presented their findings to international authorities, detailing the dangers of Project Reaper and urging stricter regulations on genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Their report sparked heated debates among scientists, politicians, and ethicists. Some argued that banning such research outright would stifle progress, while others believed humanity simply wasn't ready to handle the risks involved. Rachel became a vocal advocate for caution, traveling the world to speak about the lessons learned from Daniel's story. We live in an age of incredible advancements, she often said during her lectures. But with great power comes great responsibility. We must ask ourselves not just what we can do, but what we should do. Despite her efforts, rumors began circulating about other cryogenic pods hidden across the globe. Conspiracy theories flourished online, fueled by grainy images and unverified claims. Some believed these pods contained individuals like Daniel-enhanced beings designed for purposes unknown. Others speculated they held secrets about Earth's past, or even evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The truth, however, remained elusive. No concrete evidence surfaced to confirm or deny the existence of additional pods. Still, the idea lingered in the collective imagination, inspiring both fear and fascination. Governments launched covert investigations, while private organizations poured resources into searching for clues. Yet despite all the attention, nothing definitive was uncovered. Months passed, and Rachel found herself reflecting on Daniel more often than she cared to admit. She kept a small photo of him taped to the corner of her desk, a candid shot taken shortly after his awakening, before everything went wrong. In the picture, he stood outside the facility, squinting against the bright sunlight, his face relaxed and almost peaceful. It was a reminder of who he had been beneath the layers of science and secrecy, a man caught in circumstances beyond his control. One evening, she sat alone in her office. Rachel received an unexpected visitor. It was Eric, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on her desk and took a seat across from her. "You've been working too hard," he said gently. "You need to take a break." "I'm fine," Rachel replied, though her tired eyes told a different story. "There's still so much to do." "You've done enough," Eric countered. "Daniel gave his life to stop the nanobots. You honored that. Now it's time to let yourself rest." Rachel hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Maybe you're right. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eventually, Eric broke the quiet. You think we'll ever find another pod like Daniel's? Rachel shrugged. It's possible. But if we do, I hope whoever finds it will learn from our mistakes. Humanity has a way of repeating history, but maybe, just maybe, we can change that. Years later, the legend of Daniel Cross endured. His name appeared in textbooks and documentaries, often cited as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. Yet for those who had known him personally, his legacy was far more personal. He wasn't remembered as a weapon or a threat, but as a man who had chosen to put others before himself. As of his own life, Rachel retired from field work eventually, dedicating her remaining years to teaching young scientists about ethics and responsibility. Her classes were popular, filled with students eager to learn from someone who had witnessed history firsthand. On the last day of each semester, she would show them the photo of Daniel and share his story. Never forget, she would say, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. Science is a tool, not a solution. It's up to us to decide how to use it. As for Eric, he continued working in robotics, channeling his experiences into developing safer, more ethical technologies. Though he rarely spoke publicly about Daniel, those closest to him knew the impact the man had left on his life. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Eric would sometimes pull out old files from the Antarctica expedition, scrolling through notes and images until sleep finally claimed him. In the end, Daniel Cross became more than a name carved into a plaque buried under ice. He became a symbol, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both destruction and redemption. His story served as a bridge between the past and the future, urging people to tread carefully as they ventured further into the unknown. And though no one could say for certain whether other pods existed, the possibility lingered, a quiet whisper. In the back of humanity's collective mind, perhaps they would remain undisturbed, relics of a forgotten era. Or perhaps, one day, they would be discovered, bringing new challenges and questions to light. For now, though the world moved forward, guided by the lessons of the past and the hope that humanity might yet rise to meet its potential, and somewhere, deep beneath the frozen tundra of Antarctica, the faint glow of a metallic cylinder continued to shine, waiting patiently for the next chapter in its long, mysterious journey. The next morning, the facility was eerily quiet. The usual hum of machinery and chatter among the team had been replaced by a tense silence. Rachel sat in the medical bay, her eyes fixed on Daniel's unconscious form. His condition had stabilized after the EMP, but the toll it had taken on his body was evident. His skin remained pale, almost translucent, and his breathing was shallow. Machines beeped softly around him, monitoring his vitals. Outside the room, Eric worked with a small group to quarantine those who had been infected by the nanobots. It wasn't easy. Some of the affected researchers resisted, claiming they felt fine and saw no reason to be isolated. But Rachel knew better. The nanobots weren't just passive invaders. They were adaptive, evolving to suit their hosts. Left unchecked, they could spread uncontrollably, turning everyone into carriers of something far more dangerous than anyone fully understood. Rachel's mind raced as she tried to think of a solution. She couldn't let fear dictate their actions, but she also couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Daniel had warned them, had tried to warn himself, but now the consequences were spilling out beyond anyone's control. As much as she wanted to blame the scientists who had created Project Reaper, she knew the responsibility rested with her and her team now. They had awakened Daniel, and in doing so, they had unleashed a chain reaction that could spiral out of control. Hours passed and Daniel finally stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he looked confused, disoriented. Then recognition dawned, and his gaze locked onto Rachel. "What happened?" he croaked, his voice weak. Rachel leaned closer, speaking gently. "You lost control. The nanobots activated, and we had to use an EMP to neutralize them. You're safe now, or as safe as you can be." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to process her words. When he opened them again, There was a mixture of guilt and determination in his expression. How many others are infected? A few, Rachel admitted. We've quarantined them, but the nanobots seem to adapt quickly. We don't know how long we can keep them contained. Daniel sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. I should have stayed frozen. None of this would have happened if I'd stayed asleep. Don't say that, Rachel replied sharply, surprising even herself. You didn't ask for this. None of us did. But we're here now, and we have to deal with it together. Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. After a long pause, he spoke again. There's something you need to know. About me. About what I am. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? When I was part of Reaper, they didn't just enhance my body. They rewrote parts of my brain, too. Made me smarter, faster, stronger, not just physically, but mentally. I can feel the nanobots inside me. It's not all the time, but when they're active, it's like they're talking to me, telling me things. Things. Rachel repeated, her voice tinged with unease. What kind of things? I don't know exactly, Daniel admitted. It's hard to explain. But sometimes I get flashes images, memories that aren't mine, like someone else's thoughts bleeding into my own. And when the nanobots activate, those flashes become clearer, louder. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. Worse than she had imagined. The nanobots weren't just machines. They were intelligent, capable of interacting with Daniel's mind. If they continued to evolve, who knew what kind of influence they might exert over him or anyone else they possess? Infected. We need to stop them, Rachel said firmly. Before they spread any further. No, Daniel replied, his voice heavy with resignation. But how? Even if you manage to neutralize the ones inside me, the ones already loose will keep spreading. You saw what happened last night. They're not going to stop. Rachel hesitated, weighing her options. There was one possibility, a drastic measure that might work, but at great cost. She had avoided considering it until now, unwilling to entertain such a bleak outcome. But as she looked at Daniel, she realized there might be no other choice. There's a way, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. A chamber here designed to emit a powerful EMP pulse, strong enough to completely neutralize the nanobots, not just suppress them. But what? Daniel asked, sensing the hesitation in her voice. It would kill you. Rachel finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The pulse would destroy the nanobots, but it would also destroy anything connected to them, including your body. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. I figured it might come to that. Rachel shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, there has to be another way. I won't give up on you. You don't have a choice, Daniel said quietly. If you don't do this, the nanobots will spread. They'll infect more people, maybe even escape this facility. Do you really want that on your conscience? Rachel clenched her fists, anger and frustration bubbling inside her. This isn't fair. You didn't ask for any of this. You're not a weapon, you're a person, a human being. Am I? Daniel countered, his voice tinged with bitterness. Maybe I was never meant to be anything else. This is why they froze me in the first place, to stop exactly what's happening now. Rachel opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Deep down, she knew he was right. Whatever Daniel Cross had been before stasis, he was a ticking time bomb now. And if they didn't act soon, the consequences would be catastrophic. Later, that evening, Rachel gathered the remaining unaffected members of the team in the main hall. Eric stood beside her, his expression grim as she explained the plan. We have to activate the EMP chamber, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. It's the only way to neutralize the nanobots completely. But Daniel has to go inside. Murmurs rippled through the group, some nodding in agreement while others looked uneasy. Are you sure about this? Eric asked quietly, pulling Rachel aside. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I know, Rachel replied, her jaw tightening, but we don't have a choice. If we wait any longer, it'll be too late. Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. And Daniel. Wow. Does he understand what this means? He does, Rachel said, glancing toward the medical bay where Daniel waited. He volunteered. Eric nodded reluctantly, though his eyes betrayed his reluctance. Let's hope this works. When everything was ready, Rachel escorted Daniel to the EMP chamber. The device loomed ahead, its metallic surface gleaming under the harsh lights. Inside, wires and circuits pulsed faintly, waiting to unleash their destructive power. Daniel paused for a moment, staring at the machine that would end his life. I'm sorry, Rachel said, her voice trembling. I wish there was another way. Don't be, Daniel replied, forcing a small smile. I've lived longer than I ever expected to. Longer than I probably deserved. If this stops the nanobots, then it's worth it. Rachel nodded, blinking back tears. Thank you, she whispered, for trusting us. Yes. For being brave. With that, Daniel stepped into the chamber. The door sealed shut behind him, leaving Rachel and Eric standing outside, watching through the reinforced glass. Psst. Rachel pressed a button on the control panel, initiating the countdown. 10 seconds. 9-8. Goodbye, Daniel, she murmured. Under her breath, as the timer reached 0, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. The EMP pulse surged outward, engulfing the room in a wave of energy. When the light faded, the monitor showed flat lines, no sign of activity from either Daniel or the nanobots. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rachel turned away, her heart heavy but resolute. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the cost weighed heavily on everyone. As the team began cleaning up the aftermath, Rachel made a silent vow. Humanity would learn from this. Matter how advanced science became, some lines shouldn't be crossed. Some creations shouldn't see the light of day. And as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder how many more pods like Daniel's were buried out there waiting to be discovered. The days that followed were tense. Everyone at the research facility moved cautiously, their eyes constantly darting toward Daniel as though he might explode at any moment. He tried to act normal, joining conversations and eating meals with the team, but it was clear things had changed. The trust they once felt for him had been replaced by a quiet unease. Even Rachel, who had always been supportive, now watched him with a mixture of concern and suspicion. Daniel noticed the shift, of course. How could he not? Every glance, every whispered conversation reminded him of what he was, or at least what he might become. He spent most of his time alone, either in his quarters or wandering the icy landscape outside the facility. The cold air helped clear his mind, but it couldn't silence the storm brewing inside him. The nanobots stirred occasionally, responding to his anxiety like restless animals waking from hibernation. Each time it happened, he clenched his fists and focused on breathing, trying desperately to keep them under control. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, Daniel stood near the edge of the frozen tundra. The wind whipped around him, biting at his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by questions he couldn't answer. Why had they made him this way? What did they expect him to do? More importantly, how could he stop himself from becoming exactly what they feared? He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear Eric approach until the man spoke. You shouldn't be out here alone, Eric said, his voice carrying over the howling wind. It's not safe. Fine, Daniel replied without turning around. Besides, I doubt anyone would miss me if something happened. That's not true, Eric countered, stepping closer. We're all worried about you. Sure, but that doesn't mean we don't care. You've been through a lot, more than anyone should have to deal with. Daniel finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Do you really believe that? Or are you just saying it because Rachel told you to? Eric hesitated, caught off guard by the sharpness in Daniel's tone. Look, I get it. This is messed up. But you're not the only one dealing with this. We're all in uncharted territory here. None of us knows what to do next. Shh. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the relentless gusts of wind. Finally, Daniel sighed and looked away. I don't want to hurt anyone, he said softly. But I can feel it, whatever's inside me. It's getting stronger. And I don't know how much longer I can hold it back. You're not alone in this, Eric said firmly. We'll figure it out. Together. Daniel nodded, though he didn't look convinced. As they walked back toward the facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that disaster was inevitable. No matter how hard they tried, there was no guarantee they could contain whatever Reaper had created back inside. Rachel was reviewing the latest data when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed overhead and voices shouted in confusion as everyone scrambled to understand what was happening. Rachel bolted upright, her heart racing. What's going on? She demanded, rushing into the main hall where several monitors displayed chaotic readings. It's Daniel, one of the researchers exclaimed, pointing to a screen showing erratic signals emanating from his body. The nanobot's there, activating. Rachel's blood ran cold. She grabbed a tablet and scanned the data, confirming the worst. The dormant machines within Daniel were no longer sleeping. They were spreading, multiplying, and emitting electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to disrupt nearby electronics. If left unchecked, they could infect others in the facility. Where is he? Rachel asked urgently. He's in the lab. Someone shouted. Without hesitation, Rachel and Eric sprinted toward the lab, their footsteps echoing down the narrow corridors. When they arrived, they found Daniel doubled over, clutching his head as waves of pain coursed through him. His veins glowed faintly beneath his skin, pulsing with an unnatural light. Around him, equipment sparked and malfunctioned, succumbing to the interference caused by the nanobots. Daniel! Rachel called out, trying to stay calm despite the chaos. Listen, to me, you need to breathe. Focus on calming down. You're triggering them. I'm trying. Daniel gasped, his voice strained. Eric stepped forward cautiously, holding up a device designed to emit a localized EMP, a tool they had developed in case of emergencies like this. Rachel, we need to sedate him before it gets worse, he said grimly. If we don't, the nanobots will spread beyond containment. Rachel hesitated, torn between her desire to help Daniel and the need to protect the rest of the team. We can't risk losing him, she insisted. There has to be another way. There isn't, Eric replied firmly. If we wait too long, it'll be too late for all of us. Before Rachel could respond, Daniel let out a guttural cry as the nanobots surged outward, releasing a burst of energy that sent everyone stumbling backward. Sparks flew from the walls and the lights flickered violently. Through the haze of static, Rachel saw Daniel collapse to his knees, his glowing veins dimming slightly. This is it, Eric shouted, raising the EMP device. Get behind me. No, Daniel roared, his voice filled with desperation. Don't. But it was too late. Eric activated the device, sending a pulse of energy rippling through the room. For a brief moment, everything went still, the hum of machinery, the crackle of electricity, even the glow emanating from Daniel's body. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. When the dust settled, Rachel rushed to Daniel's side. He lay motionless on the floor, his chest rising and falling weakly. The nanobots within him had been neutralized for now, but the toll on his body was evident. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his breathing was shallow. Is he? Eric started to ask, trailing off as he knelt beside them. He's alive, Rachel confirmed, pressing 2 fingers to Daniel's neck to check his pulse. But barely. We need to stabilize him immediately. As they worked to move Daniel to the medical bay, the rest of the team began assessing the damage. Several pieces of equipment had been fried, and a few researchers reported symptoms similar to Daniel's initial enhancements: heightened strength, increased resilience, and glowing veins. It seemed the nanobots had managed to escape containment, affecting those closest to him during the surge. Rachel stared at the infected individuals, her mind racing. This was far worse than she had anticipated. Not only had the nanobots proven capable of spreading, but they also appeared to adapt to their new hosts. Without proper intervention, the entire facility and possibly the world beyond could be at risk. We need to quarantine the affected personnel, Eric said, his voice heavy with dread. And we need to find a way to reverse this before It spreads further. Rachel nodded, though her heart sank at the enormity of the task ahead. They had saved Daniel for now, but at what cost? The line between savior and destroyer had blurred, leaving them all teetering on the edge of catastrophe. As the night wore on, Rachel sat by Daniel's bedside, watching his fragile form as he drifted in and out of consciousness. She wanted to believe they could fix this, that humanity's ingenuity would prevail against its own creations. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging fear that some mistakes were simply too big to undo. And as she gazed at Daniel, she wondered, was he truly a victim of circumstance? Or had he always been destined to unleash the very thing he had been created to prevent? Rachel spent the next few days digging into the name Daniel had mentioned, Reaper. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a starting point. She scoured old databases and archives, searching for any reference to the word. Eric helped too, running algorithms to cross-check historical records with anything related to genetic engineering or military projects from the late 21st century. The more they uncovered, the more uneasy they became. At first, there was nothing concrete, just fragments of information that hinted at classified operations. But then Rachel stumbled upon something buried deep in an old government file. Project Reaper. The name sent a chill down her spine. According to the document, it was a top-secret initiative developed by a coalition of nations during a time of global instability. Its purpose? To create super soldiers capable of surviving catastrophic conditions and carrying out missions deemed impossible for ordinary humans. The file didn't provide many specifics. It was heavily redacted, but what little remained painted a grim picture. These soldiers weren't just enhanced physically. They were designed to integrate advanced nanotechnology into their bodies. Nanobots as small as cells would flow through their bloodstream, repairing injuries, boosting strength, and even adapting to new threats. On paper, it sounded like science fiction, but if Daniel Cross was anything to judge by, it was very real and potentially dangerous. Rachel shared her findings with Eric, who immediately grew concerned. If these nanobots are still inside him, he said, pointing to the notes on his tablet, then we need to figure out whether they're active. If they are, well, we could have a serious problem on our hands. Rachel nodded, her expression grim. We'll run tests tonight while he's asleep. He doesn't need to know. Not yet, anyway. That evening, after Daniel had retired too, his quarters, the team quietly gathered in the lab. They set up monitoring equipment and prepared to analyze his blood sample again, this time focusing specifically on the presence of nanobots. As they worked, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. What if the nanobots reacted negatively to their interference? Or worse, what if they activated prematurely? The results came back faster than expected and they confirmed everyone's worst fears. Not only were the nanobots present, but they were also dormant, waiting for some kind of trigger to awaken them. Rachel studied the data carefully, her heart pounding. This changes everything, she muttered under her breath. What do you mean? Eric asked, leaning over her shoulder. These bots aren't passive tools, Rachel explained. Programmed to respond to emotional stimuli, things like stress, anger, or fear. If Daniel experiences those emotions intensely, the nanobots could activate without warning. And once they do, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Eric frowned. You think that's why he was put in stasis? To prevent them from waking up? It's possible, Rachel replied. Whatever Reaper was meant to achieve, it must have gone wrong. Maybe Daniel was a prototyper, maybe he was the final product. Either way, someone decided he was too dangerous to keep awake. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the lab. One of the researchers burst in, visibly shaken. Something's happening in the main hall, he stammered. Daniel He's having some kind of episode. Rachel and Eric exchanged alarmed glances before rushing to the scene. When they arrived, they found Daniel pacing back and forth, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. His breathing was shallow, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. Several team members stood nearby, unsure of how to approach him. Daniel, Rachel called out, stepping forward cautiously. What's wrong? Turned to face her, his eyes wild with panic. I don't know, he said, his voice trembling. I can feel it's something inside me, it's moving. Rachel's stomach sank. This was exactly what she had feared. The nanobots were stirring. Whether triggered by stress or some other factor, they were beginning to awaken. She needed to calm him down before things escalated further. Listen to me, she said firmly, keeping her tone steady. You're okay. Whatever you're feeling, it's going to pass. Just focus on your breathing. For a moment, it seemed to work. Daniel closed his eyes and took slow, deliberate breaths, his body gradually relaxing. The tension in the room eased slightly, though the underlying fear remained palpable. Once he appeared stable, Rachel guided him back to the lab, where they hooked him up to monitoring devices to track the activity within his body. As the hours passed, the nanobots settled back into dormancy, leaving Daniel exhausted but otherwise unharmed. However, the incident left the team deeply unsettled. They now knew beyond a doubt that Daniel posed a significant risk not just to himself, but to everyone around him. If the nanobots ever fully activated, the consequences could be catastrophic. Later that night, Rachel sat alone in the lab, staring at the data on her screen. Her mind raced with questions. Was Daniel truly a weapon, as the documents suggested? Or was he simply a victim of circumstances beyond his control? She wanted to believe the latter, but the evidence was hard to ignore. Still, she couldn't bring herself to see him as a threat, least. Not entirely. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Looking up, she saw Daniel standing there, looking hesitant. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. "How are you feeling?" she asked, studying his face for signs of distress. "Better," he admitted, though his voice lacked conviction. "But I want to understand what's happening to me." "Been keeping something from me, haven't you?" Rachel hesitated, debating how much to reveal. In the end, she decided honesty was the best course of action. Taking a deep breath, she began explaining everything they had discovered about Project Reaper and the nanobots inside him. As she spoke, Daniel listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "So, I'm a weapon," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," Rachel replied quickly, shaking her head. "You're a person. Whatever they did to you, it doesn't define who you are. But we need to figure out how to manage this, to keep both you and everyone else safe." Daniel stared at the floor, lost in thought. For years, centuries, technically, he had lain frozen in stasis, oblivious to the world around him. Awakened in a strange new era, he was forced to confront the reality of his own existence. He wasn't just a man. He was a creation, engineered for purposes he didn't fully understand. And somewhere deep inside him, tiny machines lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. "I remember now," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Before I was put in stasis, I was part of a mission. A test run, they called it. Something went wrong. Weapons malfunctioned. People died. That's why they froze me. They said I was unstable." Rachel felt a pang of sympathy. "Do you think you can control it? The nanobots, I mean?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I don't want to hurt anyone. There's a chance they could wake up again." "We'll find a way to stop them," Rachel promised, though she wasn't entirely sure how. "In the meantime, we'll monitor you closely. Together, we'll figure this out." As Daniel left the lab, Rachel leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had always believed in the power of science to improve lives, but now she found herself questioning its limits. Could humanity truly handle the consequences of its own creations, or were they doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Unbeknownst to her, Daniel lingered outside the lab, his mind racing with doubts and fears. He trusted Rachel at least. He wanted to, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a ticking time bomb. Somewhere inside him, the nanobots stirred faintly, responding to his unease. For now, they remained dormant, but Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before they demanded attention, and when that happened, he wasn't sure anyone would be able to stop them. Daniel Cross opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights above him. At first, everything was blurry shapes and colors blending together like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. His head felt heavy, as though it were filled with sand, and his limbs refused to move. Panic bubbled up inside him, but before it could take hold, a voice broke through the haze. "Can you hear me?" The voice was soft, calm, almost soothing. It belonged to a woman standing over him, her face framed by dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She wore a white coat and held a small device in one hand, its screen glowing faintly. Behind her stood another figure, a man, taller and broader. With a wary expression on his face, Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was dry, scratchy, as if he hadn't used it in years. He managed a weak nod instead, his gaze flicking between the two strangers. Where was he? Why did everything feel so wrong? "My name is Rachel," the woman said gently. "You're safe here. Do you remember what happened?" Safe. Daniel wasn't sure about that. His memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle scattered across the floor. He recalled being cold, so cold, and then darkness swallowing him whole. Beyond that, there was only confusion. Shaking his head slightly, he croaked, "Where?" "Shh." Rachel exchanged a glance with the man beside her, who introduced himself as Eric. "You're at a research facility in Antarctica," she explained. "We found you frozen in a cryogenic pod buried under the ice. You've been asleep for a very long time. Antarctica? Cryogenic pod?" None of it made sense. Daniel struggled to sit up, but his muscles screamed in protest. Eric stepped forward to help, steadying him as he leaned against the edge of the bed. For the first time, Daniel got a good look at his surroundings. The room was sterile, clinical, with walls lined with monitors and equipment he didn't recognize. It was nothing like the world he remembered. "How long?" Daniel asked, his voice still rough. "How long was I asleep?" "Sleep?" Rachel hesitated, clearly weighing how much too. "Tell him, finally," she said. "Centuries. We believe you were placed in stasis sometime in the late 21st century. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. Centuries. It couldn't be right. He had lived in a world of skyscrapers and gasoline-powered cars, of news broadcasts, and handwritten letters. What kind of place was this now? Questions swirled in his mind, each one more overwhelming than the last. But before he could ask any of them, Rachel continued, "We don't know why you were put in stasis or who did it, but we're hoping you might have some answers. Can you tell us anything about yourself? About your life before this?" Daniel closed his eyes, trying to focus. Fragments of memory surfaced: a bustling city street, the hum of machinery, the sharp tang of ozone. There was something else too, something darker, but it slipped away before he could grasp it. When he opened his eyes again, he shook his head. "I don't know. My memories. They're jumbled. All I can think of is that things weren't right. Something bad was happening." Eric frowned. "Do you mean globally? Like a war? Or a disaster?" "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted. "Whatever it was, it scared people. Scared me." He paused, looking down at his hands. They seemed normal enough, but something about them felt off. Stronger, maybe, or faster. Die. He clenched his fist experimentally, feeling a strange surge of energy course through his veins. Rachel noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. "Are you feeling okay? Any pain or discomfort?" "No," Daniel replied quickly, perhaps too quickly, "just adjusting." For the next few days, Rachel and Eric kept a close eye on Daniel, observing his behavior while feeding him bits of information about the modern world. They explained how humanity had colonized parts of space, developed artificial intelligence, and drastically altered the climate. Some of it fascinated Daniel. Other parts horrified him. Wars had ravaged entire continents, and diseases had wiped out millions. Yet despite all the chaos, humans had persevered, adapting and evolving in ways he never thought possible. At the same time, Daniel began noticing changes within himself. Simple tasks that should have exhausted him barely registered. He could lift heavy crates without breaking a sweat and tolerate sub-zero temperatures far better than anyone else on the team. At first, he chalked it up to lingering effects of cryosleep, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. These weren't natural abilities. They were enhancements. One evening, after most of the team had retired for the night, Daniel wandered into the lab alone. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines. On one of the tables lay a stack of documents detailing his condition. Curiosity got the better of him, and he picked up the top sheet. His eyes scanned the page, widening, as he read the analysis. Genetic modifications, enhanced strength, resistance to extreme environments. Whoever he had been before stasis. He wasn't entirely human anymore. A sudden noise startled him, and he turned to see Rachel standing in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable.
Oh.
"You shouldn't be reading those," she said evenly. "I needed to know," Daniel replied, holding up the paper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel sighed and walked closer, pulling up a chair beside him, "'Cause we weren't sure how you'd react. Finding out you've been asleep for centuries is hard enough without adding genetic engineering to the mix." "But someone did this to me," Daniel pressed. "Who and why?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Rachel admitted. "Your DNA shows signs of extensive tampering, but the technology used is far beyond anything we've seen. We think you were part of some kind of experimental program, but we don't know which one or who ran it." Daniel stared at the floor, his mind racing. Experimental program. The phrase echoed in his thoughts, stirring fragments of memories he wished would stay buried. Flashes of men in lab coats, needles piercing his skin, voices discussing protocols. He didn't understand. A name floated to the surface Reaper. What did it mean, and why did it fill him with such dread? "You're hiding something," Rachel said softly, interrupting his thoughts. "I can see it in your eyes. If you remember anything, even the smallest detail, it could help us piece this together." Daniel hesitated, torn between wanting to trust her and fearing what might come next. Finally, he spoke. "There's a project, Reaper. I don't know what it means, but it's tied to me somehow, and it's dangerous." Rachel's brow furrowed, and she exchanged another glance with Eric, who had joined them unnoticed. "Reaper," she repeated, jotting the word down in her notebook. "We'll look into it. In the meantime, try to rest. You've been through a lot." As Daniel returned to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. Whatever Reaper was, it wasn't just a distant memory, it was a threat, one that might still loom over him. And as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, he realized something even more terrifying. He wasn't sure if he wanted to remember, or if he could afford to forget. In the year 2147, humanity had made incredible strides in technology and exploration. Space stations orbited Earth like metal moons, and robots performed tasks once thought impossible for machines. Yet despite all these advancements, there were still mysteries hidden beneath the surface of the planet, mysteries waiting to be uncovered. One such mystery lay buried deep under the icy expanse of Antarctica, where a team of scientists worked tirelessly in freezing temperatures. The research station was located far from any signs of civilization, surrounded by endless white plains that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was cold, desolate, and utterly silent, except for the hum of machinery and the crunch of boots on snow. The team consisted of experts from different fields, all brought together for one purpose: to drill into the ancient ice and retrieve samples that might hold clues about Earth's past. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary, at least not at first. Dr. Rachel Monroe led the expedition. She was a biologist with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Her passion for discovery drove her forward, even when conditions became unbearable. Working alongside her was Eric Dawson, an engineer who specialized in robotics. He was tall and lanky, with a calm demeanor that balanced out Rachel's intensity. Together, they made a formidable pair, each bringing their own expertise to the mission. For weeks, the team drilled deeper and deeper into the ice. Each layer revealed something new: ancient dust particles, trapped gases, and fragments of plant life that hinted at a world long gone. But on the morning of the 23rd day, something unusual happened. As the drill bit broke through another thick layer of ice, it hit something solid, not rock or dirt, but something metallic. The sound echoed through the drilling rig, catching everyone off guard. "What is that?" Eric asked, peering down into the hole. His breath fogged up his goggles as he leaned closer. "I don't know," Rachel replied, her voice tinged with excitement, "but we need to find out." The team quickly gathered around the site, their curiosity piqued. Using specialized tools, they carefully widened the opening until they could see what lay beneath. What they found left them speechless. Embedded in the ice was a sleek, cylindrical object, unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It was smooth and metallic, with faint etchings along its surface that glowed softly in the dim light. "It looks man-made," Eric said, running his gloved fingers over the markings. "But how old is it? And who made it?" Rachel crouched beside him, studying the object intently. "We won't know until we get it out of the ice. Let's bring it back to the lab." With great care, the team extracted the cylinder and transported it to their research facility. Back inside the warmth of the lab, they began examining it more closely. The glowing symbols were intricate, forming patterns that seemed almost alien. None of the team members recognized the language or the design, which only added to the mystery. Then, one of the researchers noticed something written near the base of the cylinder, a single name: Daniel Cross. "Who is Daniel Cross?" Someone muttered aloud. No one had an answer. But as they continued their investigation, they discovered something even more astonishing. The cylinder wasn't just a container, it was a cryogenic pod. Inside, encased in ice and perfectly preserved, was a human body. The revelation sent shockwaves through the team. Cryogenics wasn't a new concept. It had been used for centuries to preserve bodies in the hope of future revival. But this was different. Whoever this person was, he had been frozen for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. The implications were staggering. Could this man hold secrets about humanity's past? Was he part of some lost civilization? Or was he simply a victim of circumstance, placed in stasis during a time of crisis? Rachel and Eric debated whether to thaw him out. There were risks involved, of course. Thawing a body after so much time could cause irreparable damage or worse, release unknown pathogens into the environment. But the potential rewards outweighed the dangers. If they could revive him, they might unlock answers to questions humanity had been asking for generations. After hours of discussion, the decision was made. They would proceed cautiously, monitoring every step of the process to ensure safety. The thawing procedure took several days. During that time, the team worked around the clock, taking shifts to watch over the pod and record data. Slowly but surely, the ice melted away, revealing the figure inside. When the last remnants of frost disappeared, the team stood in awe. The man looked remarkably well preserved, his features sharp and defined. His skin was pale, almost translucent, but otherwise unblemished. He wore a simple uniform-like outfit, though the fabric was unlike anything they'd seen before. A small insignia on his chest matched the glowing symbols on the Padan enigmatic logo that remained undecipherable. "He's real," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He's actually real." Eric nodded, equally amazed. "Do you think he'll say when he wakes up?" That question lingered in the air as the team prepared for the next phase. Reviving someone from stasis wasn't just a scientific challenge. It was also an ethical one. Who was this man? What kind of world had he come from? And most importantly, why had he been placed in stasis in the first place? As they waited for signs of consciousness, the team couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the brink of something monumental. Little did they know, their discovery would lead to consequences far greater than they could have imagined. For now, though, all they could do was wait and hope that Daniel Cross would awaken safely. Arfingerar.